And I'm starting the recording and
The
starting.
broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, good day, everyone, and welcome to this Advanced Manufacturing for QuickBooks Deep Dive Demo Web Seminar. My name is Jacques Descaries. I'm the Vice President of Sales and Marketing at Industrios Software. I'm joined on this call by Edward Zuccallo, who's the Vice President of Member Advisory and Practices. Edward's online with me and will be walking us through the Industrios ERP application demonstration today, which makes up the majority of the 2 hours that we've set aside for our webinar today. I'm also joined by Eva De Gasperis. Eva is one of the owners of Industrial Software, and she also fills the role of Senior Vice President of Professional Services and Practices. Eva is online with us as well, and she'll be handling the questions panel during the webinar, which takes me to two housekeeping items. The first one is, even though all participants are muted, we do want to hear from you and allow you to ask questions. That's why Eva's online with us today to handle questions from the questions panel. You may notice on your GoToWebinar control panel, there is a subsection called questions. And again, feel free to use this to ask any questions or comments, and Eva will do her best to address these as quickly as possible. The second item in the housekeeping umbrella is the fact that on the GoToWebinar control panel, there's a section called Handouts that you can use at any time during this session to download handouts. There are 4 handouts available. 1, the slide deck for today's intro and conclusion. 2, there's a 1-page data sheet about Industrios. 3, there's a referral partner program sheet that we'll talk about at the end of this presentation. And finally, there's also a success story of a live, happy Industrios QuickBooks implementation. So these are free of charge. They're in the handouts subsection of your control panel for you to download at any time. So today's session is a software demonstration. We expect that it will require 2 hours because there's a lot of material to cover. To set the stage for what will follow in about 5 minutes, I've chosen to present 3 slides. The first of these conveys the message that although we're new to the QuickBooks world, we're not a startup. Industrios was founded in 1989. We have over 400 customers across North America, and we're all about manufacturing, specifically discrete manufacturing, and more specifically geared to handle the manufacturing modes listed on this slide, the acronyms all of which I'll walk you through. So MTO stands for make to order, MTS for make to stock, ATO assemble to order, CTO configure to order, mixed mode, and make to project, also known as project manufacturing. Many of you in attendance today also attended the product overview session with Joe Woodard on May 27th and could be familiar with the newsletter called Insightful Accountant, formerly known as Intuitive Accountant. In a 3-part article series published this summer, entitled Measuring Manufacturing Performance, the senior editor of Insightful Accountant, Mr. William Murphy, highlights very clearly what some of the important metrics manufacturers measure to evaluate the performance of their operations. a comment was made to the effect that manufacturing software is much more than a simple light assembly facility coupled with a few shortage reports. Some of the key metrics highlighted by Mr. Murphy include labor efficiency, resource efficiency, capacity utilization, manufacturing cycle time, on-time deliveries, throughput, and work in progress. As Edward walks us through the product today, you'll see that Industrios has very deep functionality that builds on the financial functionality of QuickBooks to address the needs of all the types of manufacturers listed above, while providing tools for manufacturers to measure the metrics that are important to them. The presentation today will touch on each of the 10 process areas handled by Industrios ERP, illustrated in this diagram by the orange hexagons. From estimating and quoting, to sales order management, to production orders, which triggers the scheduling, material planning, inventory management, receiving cycle, through to shop floor tracking, closing to finished goods, shipping, project or job costing and management, and finally, manufacturing CRM. What this slide also illustrates is that Industrios ERP is built to take advantage of Industrios' strong integration capabilities. This allows us to leverage the world-class functionality of third-party applications such as QuickBooks. No sense reinventing the wheel. This is known today as a hybrid ERP approach, and the types of applications Industrios ERP relies on its integration to address are not limited to finance, but also could include marketing automation, engineering applications, e-commerce portals, EDI or electronic data interchange, quality management, HR, payroll, and logistics. Back to finance with this last slide before we show software, you can see on this slide the integration points between Industrios and QuickBooks. The key points to observe from this diagram include the fact that Industrios only requires GL, AR, and AP from the QuickBooks side. The integration occurs between QuickBooks and the Industrios customer and vendor master files, and between Industrios inventory module and the QuickBooks general ledger. The arrow directions also have meaning. That is that the integration is two-way between the Industrios and QuickBooks customer and vendor master files. This structure allows Industrios the control to build the files and tables that can accommodate manufacturing specific attributes and facilities, and only rely on QuickBooks to perform treasury functions such as collections, payments, and financial statements. Those of you who attended the May 15 NAN App Academy web demonstration have already seen this integration at work, but we'll show it again today along with a more in-depth look at Industrios from start to finish. One last thing before we get into software, what I would like to do at this point is solicit your participation in a quick poll. And so I will read the question out to you. So my main reason for attending today's session is A, I have a customer or prospect with an immediate need. B, I expect to have prospects in the future. Or C, I'm simply staying abreast of new developments around QuickBooks. So I solicit your participation in this. I will let the poll run for another 20 seconds, And while this is going on, I'll repeat the question. My main reason for attending today's session is A, I have a customer or prospect with an immediate need. B, I expect to have prospects in the future. And C, I'm simply staying abreast of new developments around QuickBooks. And I thank you for your participation. We will be closing the poll in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and closing. Okay, at this point, I am pleased to turn things over to my colleague Edward Zuccallo, who will walk us through the different facilities in Industrios ERP. Remember that you can choose to use the questions panel of GoToWebinar at any point in time during this presentation to communicate with our panelists. So, that being said, change presenter, Edward, yes, and Edward, I believe you're online.
Thank you, Jacques. Oh, good morning, good afternoon to everybody. For the next 90 minutes or so, I'll have the pleasure of walking you through the Industrios product in a deep dive mode, so a little bit more than just a cursory glance through the modules. We'll look at some of the system structures that we've implemented to make things easy to implement at your client, how to configure the system to address some of the issues as noted by Jacques in terms of different modes of manufacture from MTO or MTS and so on and so forth. And then we'll take a look at some of the workflows within Industrios to help manage the daily routines that are needed on the manufacturing side. What you're looking at here is the current main menu structure of the Industrios product. On the left-hand side is a list of all of the module areas that are available, and the system is modular, so you can pick and choose what's needed after you've implemented the core of the system, and the core of the system being managing your customers, entering and managing sales, vendors and procurement, inventory, and production. Once you have that installed and working, you can then look at different modules to implement to broaden the scope and the depth of the product throughout the organization. We'll start here on the customer management module. You'll see as I open up the different tasks, there's folders that allow us to get to different processing areas. The system is all security driven, so different tasks and options are not available to everybody, but typically the work is done within the transaction processing tasks. A typical screen in Industrios will present the user with the information available, and then depending on what task is required, the user can either output information through the print icon, adding new information, taking away information, or seeking or searching information. And you'll see as I go through the screens today that those icons will remain on most of the screens and give you some familiarity with how to navigate through the system. If I open up a folder, and the folder generally tells me that there's information available within the file, it will present to me the next layer of data available, in this case for the Industrios demo company, and we will come back to the screen to look at some of the more detailed information. But one of the things that we've tried to do with our workflow management and implementing in manufacturing systems is to think about how a user needs to integrate or interpret the information and how and where they need to go within the system. So in this manufacturing account screen, you can see that I have tabs that point me to different areas such as contacts or appointments or operations, and operations will then drill down into orders and shipments and invoices and other things all related to this one customer. So although the system is modular in its approach, we've definitely taken a strategy to support workflow methods so that users can quickly navigate to where they need to get to without having to have multiple screens open at the same time, and allow them to see information when needed. One of the standards that you'll see throughout the system. I alluded to the print icon. The printer icon allows us to get to a number of tasks that are available to print or to action from this screen. And any of the tasks that I go through today, you will see that I can come into this dialog, work through a wizard which will configure either any of the tasks that are selected, and at the end will allow me to either view the information directly to the screen or print it out or output it into different methods, or more importantly allows us to offset the task operation and run it on what we call an application server. And this application server polls the system constantly and asks, do I have any tasks to do? If I submit this task in the application server, it will run the task and let me know that it's done. But what I'd like to leave you with is this, is we have the ability then to let the system have an underlying current of reporting and tasks that it's running in an unattended fashion. So that if you have daily production meetings, weekly scheduling meetings, material reviews, whatever it is that you need to do, the system allows or provides for the functionality to automatically route the reports, run them at a specific time of the day, and then route them later on either to a person's printer or through the email methods that they would have implemented. So as I go through the different standards in the system, when you think about implementing it into the different environments that you have, this definitely allows us to support the workflows that we discover as we're learning about our clients. One of the other things that we do is separate out all of the parameters and switches that are needed to set up the different modules into an area, and allows us to go into all of the different kind of switches and triggers that would be required to configure or modify the system to operate in those different modes. So somebody who's in a make to stock mode will be in a very different thought process than somebody who's in the make to order mode when it comes to inventory setup or invoicing or sales order, whichever module they happen to be in. This also allows us to document the system in terms of how it can be used and makes upgrading and changing of modules much easier as we move forward. The external systems interface is the transport that, as Jacques provided in the slide, that we use to talk to our third-party systems. And in the setup here, I'll highlight when we are working with different systems, the setup allows us and provides us again with the places to have different companies or different clients use the system in a different way. And I'll highlight a couple right here, where we have parameters that ask us whether the company wants to post invoices in real time, post vouchers in real time, or even post GL batches in real time. And if you select yes, then there's underlying parameters and settings that let the system know how to do the talking between the systems. On the QuickBooks setup, it's simply pointing to the right locations and the modes and templates that are needed for the proper transfer of data back and forth between Industrios and QuickBooks. So once we have this kind of underlying structures set up, we've got the parameters that we need to set up, we have the actual interface parameters and interface documents configured, we can then get into the next layer, which would be configuring the master files to support the different workflows that we are working with. And in particular, the workflows I'm going to talk about today are sales order processing, the manufacturing workflow through production, and supporting it with the procurement process as well. We'll end off by talking about some of the planning modules that we have to allow us to look forward in terms of either MRP type calculations or scheduling calculations, and then some of the post-sale modular functions that we have in terms of customer service and return materials. So let's start in the middle here with inventory. which is kind of the underpinning of all manufacturing systems, is somehow you have to be able to, as Eva's want to say, respect the data and have inventory as our core key driving mechanism. The different master files or maintenance tables that we have allow us to configure and create an item master file which is wide in scope and deep in detail. So the inventory numbering and how different companies and different clients would use the system is all up to the implementation project team. But once that is defined and configured, we try to make it quite easy to create new items. And it's all underpinned by this concept called types. And I'm going to visit types in most every module that we do, that we're going to look at today. So as I walk through and I notice that this product is an item type of F stock products, what that means to the system is that there's a certain number of information that automatically will come along with that FSP item type subtype structure, making it easy and simple for users to add new information. You will see as I go through the different tabs, it's quite deep in terms of the amount of information available. On the main details tab here, we have classification of inventory for reporting purposes. We have some planning defaults for purchasing. We have our accounting valuation methods used for costing of the product. And we have physical count support information in terms of physical count days, ABC codes, and the like. The next three tabs allow us to configure specific information around either the stocking of that item, the purchasing, or the selling of that item. Under the stocking tab, we have, most importantly, a unit of measure, but then also provide availability or a place for clients to place different conversions of multiple units of measure that they would like to use in terms of how they would stock and transact that item. Likewise, when they're purchasing the item, we know we stock it in eaches, but we could buy it in boxes or crate cases or cartons and have the system manage the tolerancing around the receiving, the cost tolerancing, and what the actual conversion factor is between those units of measure. In selling, again, the same concept. We have multiple units of measure available for outbound transactions. And then we have the stocking locations. Industrios supports an unlimited number here of locations, which would be kind of either warehouses or spaces that you want to accumulate that inventory and count it. And there's an information detailing underneath all of that. Each location would have possibly different stocking criteria, different pricing criteria, different revenue criteria, different costing account criteria that you would be able to manage. Once we have locations, we can then keep going deeper to deciding or having how our vendors actually used and utilized to bring the product into that location. How do we track it? Industrios supports full serial tracking and lot tracking to give you full cradle to grave traceability. And on most master file screens, you'll find this where used information, which lets you know that this item element that we're talking about here, item key 0626530, is made under this process plan, and I'll get to process plans in a moment, or it can be used as a component on other plans, so that if there's a change required and you have to go back and maybe change the revision of that item, you will know the scope or the impact, the potential impact of that change. Now, all through this item master screen, you'll have seen that this is all configured towards setting up the information itself, but not actually counting and accumulating the information. We've separated that out into our query concept, so that when you need to have transaction information or you need to have physical quantity or cost information, you can use an inventory query to access how much of a product you have on hand or in any one of the other states that we present on the main grid. Another standard here within the grid system is that the users are able to move around these columns or size them as they see fit to support their work structure. And if I leave this screen and come back in, it remembers how I've configured that screen for myself. As you can see here, the main quantity tab allows me to see the quantity information in terms of even how it's committed. I can drill down and look at the costing information that's been accumulating. And then the other 5 tabs here allow me to drill even further to get to all of the underlying transactions that generated these amounts. The transaction summary gives me a historical rolling 12 months and a future 12 months of information, so I can quickly see if the product's been moving and how and where. And if I want to see the supporting POs or sales orders that the system actually shipped the product on, I can drill. A neat feature here on the transaction detail, this gets right to the belly of the system. We call this a deep dive, so this is about as deep as you can go. And this gets us right to the transactions that were generated in the system to either put information or put inventory in or take it out. And it also manages a nice little rolling quantity here, so you can go back and troubleshoot and see the impact or what's been happening with a particular item over any period of time. I'll point here to this top row of icons across the screen. We looked at these icons on the first screen that were now grayed out because there's none of these features available, but these context items or icons are available to me, and they'll change as I scroll up and down through the transactions. In this case, I'm on a shipment transaction, so the system will let me actually show and drill to the shipment. I can drill to the invoice that was generated from that shipment, or I can go backwards and drill to the sales order from which the shipment came from. And as I scroll through, you'll have different icons appear depending on what's going on. This is a job close, so I can actually go back to the job to see how the system tracked the information to support this unit cost that came through. Once we have inventory defined within the system, we can then, in the manufacturing sense, get to the next most important building block, which is the bill of material. Now, Industrios being a to-order driven system, what we have elected to do is to implement or incorporate the bill of material into what's called a process plan, and that bill of material then becomes part of the bill of manufacture. When we look at the requirements of manufacturers to have capacity utilization or look at labor and resource efficiencies, we need to set the standard somewhere. The process plan, and through the elements that we have on this master file table, allows us to build a full description or recipe of how a particular item is to be built. Now, depending on where the client happens to be in that scale from make to stock through custom engineer to order, this document or this data will be either very well matured and defined, or it's going to be defined as they go along and build the product. If I open up the maintenance screen, you'll see a list of item numbers for which we have bills of manufacture defined. We have a versioning of this bill of manufacture, which allows us to have multiple methods to make the same product, and then information about what that recipe entails. And if there's any process loss, any conversion factors, we support statusing and drawing in integration to that process plan, and some ability to link back to different multimedia files. Where the rubber really hits the road is when we get to the full screen mode here. And this describes about as much information as we know to build any product or any element or any item that we want to have a job for and later produce. So this would be called an engineering template or an engineering plan, and it describes the sequencing through our production facility in the dark lines. The lighter blue lines represent resources required, so we separate out machine from person. It allows us to document how much time we expect as a standard for either setup or runtime. And in runtime, we do support multiple units of measure so that different types of manufacturing can be supported. Once we have the sequencing and the time required, we can then drill deeper and get into scheduling modifiers for how a product actually flows through a particular plant. It's not usually, unless it's a production line, where a product goes from step A to step B to step C to step D without having some type of scheduling modifier. And that could be a queue time where it's waiting, some type of overlap or lag, or maybe two processes can start at the same time but have to finish before a third process can commence. And through these delay types and the usage of these fields here, we can fully support and model how a product is to run through the factory floor. As I scroll up and down through the sequences, the bottom section represents the bill of material that I require at that sequence. And you can see right now it's fairly blank until I get to the top, where in this case the fairly simple conversion of taking some input material, running it through a set of processes to get to an output material. And in this case, my input material is a component from stock. I am taking one sheet of that component. I note that I already have a vendor predefined. I may have some lot sizing or different qualifications around building that bill of material. And this will get multiplied through. So in this case, I need one sheet per unit to make one of these shield black shields. If I launch a production order for 100 black shields, then the system will miraculously do the calculation and say that I should use about 100 sheets of inventory. That information will get passed over to material planning and purchasing as needed. But more importantly, by separating out the bill of material to usage points, we can integrate the usage of material, the need of that material, with the schedule. So for example, if this job were scheduled and I needed the material on the 1st of September, but it was a very long process, I didn't need my packaging materials until the 15th of September, any component that I put on the bill of material for the packaging step will not have a requirement date until the 15th of September, allowing us to use a much better time-phased approach to our material planning. When implementing Industrios, a significant amount of time is spent making sure that these plans reflect not only what would be the proper bill of material, but the proper standard or cost estimate for that product, so that when we're setting up our jobs on the production floor, we know what we're supposed to be doing and can then track what we're actually doing in comparison to that. Okay. Once we have inventory and process plans, now we can get into our actual operation workflow. So what I'm going to go back up to the top, and we're going to start with a quote, and we're going to run that quote through its life into a sales order, produce it, ship it, and invoice it. In the quoting module, as I mentioned in the inventory module, we had types. I do want to highlight one thing in our master file, and that is our ability to do quote types. And as I run through the different modules, you'll see in sales order there are sales order types. In customer service there are customer service ticket types. In procurement there are PO types. And what the type concept allows us to do is to define different workflows that can support the different things that customers would be doing. In this case, this client has many different types of product that they build and that they quote. But importantly, around the statusing or how a quote actually lives through the life of a quote to a sales order, we can differentiate between these different types. So in this case, an architectural product, if I click on the status, it goes from new, send it out, follow it up, and then you win, lose, or cancel it. And you have modifiers here that allow you to send out information or allow information to be processed once a certain step has hit, such as send an email to a particular salesperson to follow up a quote when it hits this stage. If I scroll to the custom projects, the statusing might be different. In this case, between the new and sent to customer step, we have to stop in estimating and require maybe additional information back from the client to be able to properly quote this process. By separating out these different types, when you're implementing Industrios, you can now support the different, again, I could come back to workflows, to make it easy to communicate what people should be doing, when they should be doing it, and how they should be doing it. So this all rolls up to actually entering a quote. And I'll just walk you through a couple of quotes that are here. So in this case, this open quote list, we have the ability to track. We have revision numbers around the quotes, when the quote came in, when it's due. And you can see these little icons here that appear on the screens. Let me know that there's information from the customer management system available to me. So in this case, this tells me that someone has documented an activity, or that there's a document that's been attached to this quote. If I click on it and move to my icon here, I can see that there's been a follow-up activity that was done. I can open up that activity and I can see that the person called to check on the status of the quote and that the PO was actually sent when the person was on the phone. I can also then scroll across the document tab, and you can attach at any screen within Industrios any number of documents that you would like. In this case, there was an incoming document that came in. I'll open it up, and there's a PDF document that attaches to something within the system. The actual quote itself, if I look at the lines in the quote, we have this method here is what we call embedded process plans, which allows us to quote from an engineered template, so from the process plans that we were just talking about a moment ago in terms of the routing and bill of material, allows us to modify it specifically for this custom piece of information or this custom item and quote it specifically. So if I link, again with my context icon, to the process plan, I can see the detail that was entered specifically for this quote item, this custom item for this quote. By going to the full screen, I'll see how they have determined what times they require and what materials they require, and that will all roll up to allow me to get to a costing and a price. So we support, or there are multiple, if I just show you here, there are different types of lines that you can place on a quote. An inventory type line will look at your price book or your pricing mechanism for a particular customer and present back the pricing, and you'll see if I click on inventory, this cost details disappears because the assumption is that the cost is coming from the inventory system rather than the production system itself being custom. If I click on embedded, now it shows me back my detailing of how I can do my cost calculation. If this were, let me just undo this. If this were a one quote, so in this case this W statusing lets me know that the quote has been won, and I would expect to see a linked sales order for that quote. If I look at the quote that is in this status, which is new, it's in estimating, I don't expect to see a link to a sales order because it has not been awarded to me just yet. So if I click on the W and on the SO item, it takes me right to the sales order that was linked back to this quote. So this quote converted into the sales order, and I look at my lines, and any of the lines that were then converted come across with the requisite pricing and quantities and dates. At this point, I have my my demand is in my system, so my sales order demand is in my system, and depending on the different modes of manufacture, if this was a make to stock, then we would expect to find inventory available to me and we go through a shipping process. If we're a make to order, then I would expect to find some type of job. In this case, there's a job that's been created for this item based on the process plan or based on that quote plan that we developed during the quoting cycle. And I would produce or supply the system with the item, this custom white acrylic item, from the production through this job. I'm going to keep drilling and get into the job itself. And I can see here that the job has a status of planned, which lets me know right away that it has not been started on the floor. If I try to track the job, I'd expect to find it not started. If I look at the summary tab, I see that my job cost estimates are prepared for me so that I have an indication of how much time is required and how much money that requirement is going to entail. I'm going to come back. So from the quote screen here, I've been able to go to a few different places. I'm going to go back up one level higher to where I started this morning and look at our account screen and operations. So as mentioned, I have one place to go to see any quotes if I had for this client, any sales orders that I have for this client, any shipments that are currently in process, any of my shipping history would be available to me for tracking purposes, any invoices that have not been posted, any of my invoice history would show up here as well. What having this information allows me to do is to maintain a current view of my aging for that client or that customer in terms of where we're doing in terms of credit, how many pending orders they have open but not shipped, if they've deposited any money with me in advance on a particular order, and how their payment aging happens to be. If I want detail about the structure here, the information here, I can drill in and see that I've got a current invoice that was done yesterday, and the last payment I received was in this day, which looks like it was a partial for this item here. Okay, so back out here. So in the sales order flow, once we have that quote and we've generated that sales order and that sales order has placed demand into the system, let's take a look right now at the make to stock functionality. We could possibly run a requirements for all orders, and the system will look at all the orders and interpret whether we have enough stock right now to ship it. So in this case, if I just want to show everything that can ship, everything that's green, I know that based on the requirements of the items and the amount of inventory that I have, I could send these down to the warehouse and pick them completely. If I look at partially available, these orders are partially available to me, so there's only 40% commitment, 80% commitment, 78.95% commitment, because possibly in this case, only one line item is partially available. Only 15 of 19 are available. Depending on my process requirements or my procedures, I could send that down to the warehouse as well for packaging. So the shipping flow starts with our sales order. In our shipment workbench, we monitor and maintain the product that is supposed to be shipped. So elements or entries that are made here, because of the process, it is allowing someone in shipping to either start to call or look at the external shipping systems, which could be FedEx or UPS, to start to get pricing for it. Maybe start to document and fill in the packaging information or the carrier information that's required. If it's a process that goes through a broker and a freight forwarder as well, the information would either come through from the sales order or they could enter it. On the lines themselves, the person would be picking the item, letting us know what bin number, possibly what serial number or lot number is being shipped. And at the end of that process, would be able to generate the documents required for outbound shipping, be it a pick ticket for the warehouse, a packing slip to go with the product, and maybe some documentation that's required for logistics or for cartage in terms of the bill of lading and commercial invoice. The act of posting or selecting and posting this shipment relieves finished goods of the inventory and stages an invoice ready for matching. So all of these invoices have come from some type of shipment and are waiting for either the signed packing list or confirmation of delivery to come back to us so that we can then either add information in terms of freight added or different details that we require on the line items, or simply generate an invoice, send it out through email possibly if needed, route it to our customer if required, and post the invoice, which would then be our trigger to QuickBooks that we have an open receivable or an open item ready for money to come in. And I will show that integration towards the end of our doc. Similar to the sales order flow that we have, the vendor or procurement flow is a mirror image. So the vendor management screen would be a mirror to the customer account screen, allowing us to go into any particular vendor, having a look at criteria for that vendor, having a look at the payables profile for that vendor, possibly looking at any open orders that we have for them, or a history of payments. And if I wanted to scroll or drill into any of these envelopes, or sorry, folders, lets me know that I can open that up. And as well here, you can see that we have the potential to interact with our vendors the same way as we have with our customers in terms of creating follow-up appointments or check-in appointments, maybe some quality audits that are required and the like. Once we have the vendors defined, then we can go through the procurement cycle, which is simply creating of the purchase order, receiving of the purchase order, and then vouchering that purchase order in anticipation of the vendor invoice. So a quick look at the screens. A purchase order screen, similar to a sales order, allows me to have multiple types of lines that we have available to us. So we have our standard buy it to inventory or do a non-inventory purchase. And then these three types, the direct purchase or material or subcontract, are special types of configured PO lines, which will highlight the job number that we're building for. So in this case, if I want to buy a material, I would select the job number that I want to buy for. So let's buy for something that's, let's take a look at this one. And if the bill of material was defined, anything that I needed to buy would be listed for me. In this case, I have to buy one of these plates. So by selecting this material type line, it allows me to connect that PO directly with the job so that receiving personnel knows what's required. Receiving screen allows me to select the purchase order that has arrived, document information around that PO or that packing list that's come in, and indicate whether the entire quantity has arrived or if it's been a partial or if there's some deviation with the quantity here at the receiving dock. So the first dock stop matches the PO requirements from a quantity point of view to the packing list. Once that receipt is posted, then it sets up the voucher for us, and it sits here waiting for the mail to be opened likely and the invoice from the vendor to arrive so that we can then match the dollars and the quantity with the incoming invoice from the vendor. The functionality in Industrios fully supports the required cost adjustments needed to keep inventory in sync. So if I were to go into this voucher and were to change either the quantity that came in or the cost that that quantity came in at, the system has functionality to go back and seek out the receipt of that item. Where is that item currently? It could be still in inventory, so there would be a cost adjustment made to that inventory item. Some of that item could have been used and consumed on a job, so it would then go through logic to see where the job is and what state the job was and potentially do a cost adjustment to the job. Or it may have already been gone through to a cost of sales because it's been shipped out of the building as part of a shipment in either the current period or a prior period, and the system will make the required and requisite adjustments as needed so that inventory tying to accounts payable is always reconcilable. Okay. The supply or the demand side from sales order and will, as we said, triggers two types of supply. Either you're buying the product or you're going to make the product. So let's take a deeper look at making of the product and the job the job entry screens. So I'm going to click over to production and take a look at our job entry screen, which is a listing of all jobs in the system currently. This large bar at the top, you may have noticed on a couple of different screens, allows me to have predefined data views, so to make it easy to find some information. In this case, I've got show me everything, show me those jobs that need a plan, show me those jobs that are partially completed, or in this case, show me those jobs that are in process or released. So I get my listing of in process and released jobs. I can then start scrolling through them or filtering on them or reporting on them, depending on what information I'm trying to seek. This in-process job, I'm curious about how I'm doing against my estimate. So I'm going to click on my summary, and there are my estimates set up in terms of hours and dollars that those hours calculate to in terms of labor and overhead calculations. Material is an inventory transaction, and then how I'm actually doing here. So if I check my materials, I may have pulled everything and maybe the cost of the items is lower now for a reason. I obviously overdid my hours by quite a bit, so it's showing it to me here. That's the dollar impact of that overage. And here's my total job cost. Now, depending on the costing method that I'm using for this item, so I'll go back to inventory, and I see that in this case, this is a FIFO type item. When we close this job, all of these costs will be moved over to inventory. If I were standard costing, then the cost that's set up in inventory, hopefully supported by this estimate, will be moved to inventory, and any variations on that in terms of the actual to what the standard was will go to my cost variance accounts. Okay. From this production control screen, again, I can drill into tracking, so who did what. I want to know who did those 14 hours. Here are the details of all the transactions, who was paid, when they were paid, when they worked, what time of day they worked, to support the calculation of these hours. If I wanted to see the material transactions, I can click on the button and it will show me the list of items, in this case one item that was taken, and there's the detailing around the item that was pulled. If it was supported by a serial or lot number, I could also see it here. So in this case, I may want to run some reports. Again, on our handy report screen, I have a large list of reports that can be run from the production area. They could be listing oriented in terms of status on the floor for verification and validation. I have multiple layers of job costing, which will take these numbers and split them out either in summary or detail. A shop traveler, which can be printed in a barcoded form or not. A dispatch of schedule, and then some checking reports in terms of here's my shortages, what do I need for this job or series of jobs, a capacity of my work centers. Remember that we had the time allocated by sequence or by work center. We could take a look at the open capacity or not available capacity. How am I doing on materials, and then a status report. So depending on what I need, either from a production controller point of view or supervisor point of view, I can filter my jobs to get either a subset of the jobs and run a report, or run reports on everything that I'm looking for. And again, because it's supported by the routing tab, I can have that run every morning, at the end of every shift, every day, once a week, to support my requirements for having information from the system. How do we get now the information here to support the actual costing. So data collection or transacting from the floor is done in a couple of different flavors. One, and the simplest, is you just manually type in your timesheets from the floor, where somebody possibly is letting you know that here I'm employee such and such, I worked on this job, on this sequence, at this machine, that's the date I worked on it, and that's how many hours that I possibly worked. In this case, it could be 1, 10, 100, whatever hours they worked. And you would enter these transactions in, tag them, post them, the system would validate the information, and if it was valid, would push it through to the job cost. Obviously, that's not exactly real time. That's at best, maybe the next day or the end of the shift, as people are entering those manual timesheets. The next layer above that would be to use a shop floor mechanism to generate those transactions at the source. And these transactions, at the moment that they're posted, if properly configured, will immediately show up on the job cost. The screen is a fairly simple screen for usage on the floor. So the person would type in their code or scan their code. In this area here, you could either display a dispatching or a list of jobs for that work area, or a text file to tell them, things like this company has worked for X days without a lost time accident, and different communication information that you want to tell to your employees. So I'm going to come in, and that's the wrong employee. I'll find out which employee I actually need to use. I'm going to actually go down into my employee list and believe I was using employee 121. I'll confirm that. Believe so. So employee 121, it says, do you want to clock in? So the system recognized that I have not made a transaction yet today and is asking me whether I want to do a time and attendance transaction. Sure, I do. So at the moment that I clock in, I now have a list of potential jobs that I could work on, or things that I was doing at a time in the past. In this case, I was last doing some maintenance, so I want to restart that maintenance activity. I'm going to resume that activity, and now the clock, my clock, is now calculating how much time I'm working on this maintenance activity. If I stop this activity, because I want to actually start a job, stop it, tells me that it stopped, and I'm going to go ahead now and start to run another job. Ask me what job number I'm working on. I can use the keyboard as per the screen here, and I can look for a job that's available to me, or I could scan it. In this case, here's an in-process job that I'll scan on. Which sequence I'm going to work on? I'll work on this fabrication sequence at that work center, and start. So now I am the person that I am has a clock running on this job number, SP144721, running the general fabrication activity at Work Center 400. And I would leave the screen. Leave the screen here, walk away, walk back to my workplace, and I would perform their activity. 1 minute, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 10 hours later, I would come back and tell the system, I'm done, or I'm stopping, or I'm finishing. It'll ask me how many components I've made if I'm tracking quantities, and it'll ask me if I'm completely finished for everybody else, so that it would remove the job and complete the status on our job tracking screen. I'm not going to go back in just yet because I want to show you from a supervisory point of view what the shop floor system allows us then to do is to have a bird's eye view of all my employees, and either by shift if I use my data view bar, or by visually I can see that Hang is clocked in. I want to know what he's working on without going to the floor. I click on the labor activity, and it gives me a picture of what they're working on. It actually lets me know how much time they've been running on it. So as I come off that record and wait a few seconds and come back, you'll see that that's now 0.228, and so on and so forth as it accumulates time to be able to do our job costing. So from a supervisory point of view, the usage of the shop floor data collection stations allows us to have a much closer to real-time picture of what equipment is doing. So you can see if equipment is up or down. You can see what your personnel are doing, if they're working on the right job or the assigned job or not. And as we mentioned, because we're tracking, because we acknowledging when they start and when they stop, we then have the ability to provide an interface or integration for payroll reporting. The time card management module here is supported by all the transactions done on the shop floor and allows us to track the time card transactions, send them around to supervisors for approval, and once the pay period is done, we can then run calculations to either generate our holiday and indirect labor calculation or our overtime calculation, and then generate a payroll interface file that can go off to different payroll providers. So the labor side and as well as material side can be done through the shop floor transaction. I showed you how labor could be manually entered, or it could then be transacted from the shop floor. Similarly, inventory and inventory movements can be transacted manually through manual move tickets or consumption tickets that are entered on a screen where the employee places their name, what type of transaction are they doing, for what job, and how many materials or how much bill of material items they're dispensing or consuming. Or the same transactions can be done if appropriate rights are given to the employees on the floor. If I look at all the different types of actions, I can pull a material, return a material, or scrap a material right from these shop floor stations. These shop floor stations without having to do manual time tickets. Obviously, the closer you get consumption to the physical, the transaction of the consumption to the physical consumption of the product, your ability to have timely and accurate inventory information is increased. Remember, as we said, the first master file that we looked at was inventory. At the end of the day, everything's going to go through inventory, so we want to make sure that we put in all functions and all abilities that we have to be able to accurately represent what inventory we have and where it happens to be. We do support a third type of data collection. We call it mobile. And through the mobile transaction manager, what this allows us to do is to deploy Windows CE supported tracking devices, and either with barcode or without, and you can do different types of transactions, such as your inventory transactions, closing a job, which allows us to then put inventory into stock for shipping purposes. We can support our physical count. We can do our receiving or shipping or any of the shop floor transactions through the handheld units. So sometimes, depending on the configuration of the warehouse or different warehouses that they have, sometimes it becomes more appropriate to have point of use mobile transaction units as opposed to centralized shop floor data collection terminals, which people would have to walk to get the information back into the system. The most important part is that we deploy as close a process as possible to having those transactions generated at the source in a timely fashion, so that when we look at our job costing and our production control module, as we did earlier, that would be as timely as possible. Now, at the end of I'm going to get into planning in just a second, but before we leave production, one of the key questions that was noted in terms of a manufacturing system is knowing around our work in process. So Industrios, because of the transactions and the way that we're monitoring and managing the transactions, at any point in time you can run a work in process calculation, and you can have that calculation run as a certain date and time. So you can go back and run it last week, or where was I last week, and the system will recognize which jobs were in process last week and give you the work in process. I'm not going to run it right here, but the report that it can generate, here's a sample of a report, would have a detailing by job if we require. This is a summary report, but it could detail it out in terms of what our costs were in our different elements. If this was a month-end process and I'm doing a WIP work in process calculation, the period expenses part of the work in process would be journalized and a reversing entry made. Whereas the perpetual accounts, which are under your material and purchases accounts, are not, because they're perpetual. And then at the end of this, I have a summary of by job and a total of all my work in process at the end of the report. So I can run this as often as I want. Obviously, to support our financial reporting, we're going to do it, but from an operations point of view, if it's needed more often, you can. And work in process is not only dollars, but it's also manufacturing in terms of where the job is, are the quantities correctly reported, and is the statusing correctly reported. So if there's an auditing of work in process from a physical sense required, Industrious also has the requisite reports and functionality to allow you to find at least what the system thinks about those jobs, and then you can go and update as required. Okay, physical count. So as I mentioned, in the inventory there were some standards or settings that you can set for a physical count number of days or the ABC classification of an item. We saw that on the mobile transactions that there's also a physical count support. But a quick look at the process or the workflow in physical inventory is an interesting one. Again, we have our types. So in this case, we have 3 or 4 different types selected. In this case here, we have a full count, except everything in consignment, which is fine. So a full inventory count of everything that we own, which might be done once a year. If you want to implement cycle counting, you can create as many different types of counts which will generate snapshots of information to be counted. And these counts can be tracked and repeated as necessary. In this case, I've got a control group that the criteria is actually from this one bin number, so I'm only checking this bin number. Over and over and over again, I'm checking this bin number, and I could modify the items that are allowed in my count by some qualifiers that say, should I go back and verify if the count is required? Do I count it if any transactions have been done? So if there's no transactions, do I worry about counting it at all because there should be no change? Or do I look for only those that have specific types of transactions since a specific date, which allows me to then create a physical count with the right information, have the information presented to me. I can generate my tags, I can generate my count sheets, I can send it out to the floor, either through the mobiles or through manual methods. They can report back to me if it's been counted. If a particular count comes back in and I'm not happy with it, I can send it back for recounts, and the system tracks the different count numbers that we've implemented or we've incurred for that particular item. And at the end of which, this will provide for us a variance of once I enter the count quantity against what I physically had. So if I come in here and I just type in 107, okay, when it regenerates my variance, I'm still out in terms of quantity, I'm still out in terms of dollars, depending on what my units of measure happen to be, and I can filter and use advanced filtering within the system to only filter or only focus on those items with or without variances to determine whether I should recount or whether I'm going to accept the count as is. At the end of which, I will have an overall indication of how much write up or write down dollars I have with a specific count. And if I'm happy, I can post that count. Updates all the inventory with the correct adjustment transactions, and we move forward. On a history basis, all of the prior counts that we've done are sitting here. So I have a running amount of write-offs or write-ups and write-downs, and I can go back in to see if a particular item caused problems again and again, and possibly look at the underlying processes and procedures that are being used and the different work instructions or work procedures that are affecting that particular item as to why it continually comes back up on a variance report, and try to tie that down. Okay. Okay. Like physical inventory, there's a few modules or a few areas within the system that allow us to look across information and do more planning-oriented functions. So again, as we look at our panorama from make to stock to engineer to order, someone who's heavily engineer to order would just be building their bill, buying it, adding it to the job, making the parts, and shipping them out. Whereas someone that has more is more planning oriented, possibly make to stock or even make to order, that they want some sub-assemblies or some partially produced components in stock ready to convert to finished when the orders come in, we can use the material planning and the scheduling modules to help us do some forward looking. So the material planning module has different elements allowed in it in terms of how you accumulate your inventory locations, so you can net inventory locations together or keep them separate for planning purposes. You could implement forecast spreadsheets either on the demand or supply side, any amount of which that you like. So in this case, you know, there's a whole bunch of different forecasts from different maybe clients or different sales areas or territories, and we're deciding which ones we want to include or not. And then we run a calculation. Now this calculation can be run again through the running automatically every night, and there's certain parameters that you would set up to run the calculation how you would like to run it. But the two outputs, main outputs from this calculation are, one, a suggested list of purchases. So we have a workbench which then is created for us, letting us know when an item was required, when we should have acted on it based on the lead time. So in this case, we have 5-day lead time, so we should have acted on it on May 15th. If there's a preferred vendor defined, in this case, we have 4 different vendors that we could use, but one of them has been set up as our preferred vendor, and how many and why we need it. So which job required it and what state it was at, what the item is, and if there's any PO to create the PO information, we have defaults. So my task as a planner would be to make sure that any records that I'm responsible for, and I might have my own, you know, here's our anything for minimum stock, that's a new listing, these are needed only for minimum stock requirements, so I'm going to take everything from this vendor, I could tag them all here, click the PO button, and it would create the purchase order for me already, automatically, ensuring that I did things properly, like not buy things in the past. So I would have to actually put a future date here, but it would validate and verify that this information is correct, validate and verify that this is above the minimum quantity, and go ahead and create my purchase order. The other output from the material plan goes back to jobs, and if I look at a particular type of job, which are SP jobs generally, these are system plan jobs, so the system has made requisitions to production to build this product because it's needed for either sales order or it's needed on a higher level bill of material. So as a production planner, my job would be to review these jobs, possibly check my material availability to see if I could load it, maybe check my capacity to see if I could run it, see when it's actually scheduled to run, and release the job if I want to accept it into my production schedule. So some of these, if I go down to the very end of the report where it says it would say preliminary or have a different statusing would be that those are the ones that I need to accept into my planning horizon. Those requisitions or jobs that I don't accept into my planning horizon, when I rerun my material planning calculation, are deleted and recalculated based on any change that happened from the last time that I ran the plan. At any time, I could go into this query and view a very high-level picture of any inventory item. And again, through my use of my filtering, this filter concept, I could filter on a range of items, a particular number of weeks. So in this case, I could say, up to the next, 8 weeks if I wanted. Only want buy items as opposed to make items, and see what happens. And I've got a list that comes up. Now I'm particularly concerned about these types of suggestions. So the system separates out 2 types of suggestions for me. An A2 suggestion typically is going to come from a minimum stock. So in this case, I have 201 to start, 30 are going to be consumed, which takes me below my 200 minimum. I have an order quantity multiple. I'm telling it buy in batches of 500, so the system suggests that I buy 500. I don't have to act on those minimum stock ones if I don't want to. I might have some leeway or some procedure as to when I act on them. But these A3 items, if there are any, let's see, are critical. What this is telling me is that I need to support some firm demand in the system by getting more supply into the system. So right now I have on hand coming in, I've got supply coming in but not enough, I need 108 more. And that's where the system has suggested something for me. At any time, if I want to look at the time phasing, and this is where the dates on the process plan and the dates on the purchase orders, the dates on the sales orders all come together. And I can see that it goes back and it lists for me in terms of time and lets me know when it is that I go negative, at what point I go negative, and which jobs may or may not be affected. In this case, if this is a critical purchase, I could click on the line, go to my supply button. It'll take me to the requisition if it's not a minimum stock requisition. So it'll take me to that requisition and I could buy it. Okay. If this was a job, in this case, I could also click on that job, plan it, look at the criteria around why I need the job or not, and go ahead and build the job into my schedule. At this level, some of the output that's available to us are things like an action report, which will tell us elements such as which items maybe I have too much supply that I should cancel, or that within my horizon of demand I don't have anything coming in, so I should look at that as to why the supply was created and is it valid or not. On time is one that I usually don't worry about, but the order early or order late are important because I either have supply coming in too early and I'm using up cash too early and maybe want to push it out to meet the requirement better, or I have an expedite problem and I need to pull it in. Those indicators, when I want to communicate back and forth, can tie us back to our customer account or the customer manager system or vendor management system. And if I want to find this purchase specific PO and I would like to let someone know to expedite it, I could, at this point, create an appointment for them to expedite it, create an activity saying I should have expedited it, or attach a copy of the report to it, letting them know that this is running late. So although purchasing has its own amount of reports that they can run at any time to find out what's late or what's not, we could be feeding different departments and communicating to them based on the requirements coming through from from the planning cycles. The planning cycle goes out as long as it needs to. Bucket 1, it tells you the dates that it's working on. If I scroll down a couple of pages, I might find, let's take out the ranging. I'll see that this is going out 6 weeks. So I see for this one particular item, if I look at it 0302-1092, 0302-1092, I can see 6 weeks worth of usage on this item where I have stock on hand right now. I have a forecast demand coming in, but no firm demand coming in here. So this is where even week 1. So in this week, someone on the sales side told me that someone was going to buy 20, but they didn't. So either my forecast is awry, I got to go back to my customer to ask them what's going on. Maybe they forgot to place an order on us, but you can see that I have, in this case, way more than enough stock to cover what's required for this forecast requirement. So the inventory planning cycle allows us to take the daily input of sales order information, purchase order information, jobs, all the transactions, all the movements, physical counts, on-hand quantities, and run it through our material planning cycle. On the other side, we have, on the capacity side, what's going on with our work centers. So we have 2 modes of scheduling. Within the production control module, we use what's called infinite capacity planning, so that you get your capacity shows you your overload conditions. Whereas when you get to the advanced module, you can then implement finite capacity techniques, and you can implement it into multiple scenarios. So you can do what-if calculations. The scheduling process itself allows you to create scenarios, as many as you need to have, and that scenario could be based on a resource plan which tells us which machines are activated on which days, how efficient they are, and how effective they are, and you would run your calculation. The result of the calculation will be a couple of queries I'll show you in a moment, and a workbench that looks something like this. So in this case, I've zoomed in on today, and it shows me here's my work hours coming up, and these are the jobs at the different work centers that are required. If I hover over a particular job, it tells me information around that job. If I right-click on that job, I can highlight the whole job within the schedule. Click there. And it shows me the dependencies between work centers, and if I scroll out again, it shows me where the job started, where it comes through, and where it's supposed to go to next. So you can see if there's any dwell or any delay times within those work centers. At any time, I could see, well, I'm curious about this work center here. I click on it, and it gives me a listing of all the jobs and the schedule time, as well as the remaining time for that particular work order. So I'm getting right down to the minute in terms of scheduling, and I can mix and match my finite and my infinite techniques to get to a valid and realistic picture of what's happening on the floor. Of course, I can grab and I can drag and drop and move things around, and the system will calculate for me. But in my experience, once you have the visual picture of what's going on, most of the work is done at the detail level. Let me show you what that looks like. So I go back to my queries. I'm going to show you these 3 queries. So the job analysis query, I'm going to select my scenario, will show me a list of all the jobs. And I'll open this up. Need a new show here everything. Show me all my jobs. Okay, so I have all my jobs here in this grid, and I can interact with this table by clicking on it and sorting on it. So I want to sort it on due date. But more importantly, on the right-hand side, I have things like, is the material available? These are all the jobs the material is available for. These are not available. How early am I? Am I early? Am I late? And how much cost is left to complete the job? So I can interact with this to decide whether the schedule is a good schedule or not. And when I like the schedule, I can what we call implement it, which takes the dates for the job, a particular job, and sends these dates back to the tracker on production order. So these are the dates that are trying to be followed by production control group. The second query allows me to see a view of my work centers. And again, I'm going to undo my range here. And I'm going to look at this on a weekly pattern. Okay. So it's going to summarize and give me a list by week in terms of what was my capacity for a particular work area, what has been loaded into that particular work area, and how much utilization do I have. If I'm only curious about utilization, I can always come back into here and just ask the system to only show me utilization and save that. And now I have a list just of the one type. And quickly here I can tell that I'm using a finite method because I never go above 100%. And finite will either push jobs out or pull jobs in to either give us our latest completion date or our earliest start date, and that could be before or after my due date. Whereas an infinite schedule will always hit the due date, but it will back up hours and you'll go overloaded, and you'll see red markers to tell you which weeks and which work centers go overloaded. The last query from a planning point of view is this material query. And again, I'll do my range. Okay, and what's here is it has taken the schedule and looked at all of the incoming supply, and it has let me know whether the material is available, what PO the material is coming in on, and what the supply date is, and if there are any variances. So these are all from on hand, and there might be some that are partially available or possibly late to this schedule, and I could then feed that information back to either my procurement group or my production group and get and either expedite or move out dates as required. So the scheduling and material planning modules work on top of all of the daily transaction information that we're running from sales orders, purchase orders, inventory, and the like. And that gets us to the point where we can actually ship something and integrate our information over with our QuickBooks. So let's go through that scenario. So I'm going to open up QuickBooks over here, just that it's open on the screen, and the customer I'm going to use is this one. Okay, so I'm going to take a particular sales order, and the last one is fine, and I'm going to go ahead and ship some of that of those items. So I've got 12 available to ship. Let's just ship one. And I'm going to create the shipment today, so that's fine. The shipment's now created. It gives me a little indicator here that the shipment is available to me. I'm going to go to that shipment now, verify the information. I'm going to pick the item, tell it which bin number it's coming from, because we do support multi-bins if required. Save it, and post this shipment. If the shipment posts properly, it'll disappear from my screen. In this case, it's failed. Let's find out why it's failed. Because I have to ship it by the 12th. All right. So let's go back and fix that. I should have known better to ship it in the future. Can't do that. And Ziva's chuckling right now. She's saying, that's why you're in consulting. I'm going to now try to post this shipment again. Okay, so that shipment was posted. It's now created an invoice for me at the end of this list. There is my invoice that came from the shipment that I just posted. And now I could interact with that. Let's go back over here. Interact with that invoice if I wanted to, again, add freight or add information to it. And what I'm going to do is just go ahead and post the invoice. So tag it and post it and process that. And we'll just keep our eye over here. What should appear is the next invoice number once it's assigned should pop up into QuickBooks here. There it is. So invoice 106-200 was created on Industrios. It's no longer in my invoice workbench because it's sitting in my invoice history. There's invoice 106-200, and the requisite inventory, entry was made on QuickBooks so that I could take the one item that I shipped at $125 each and wait for payments to come in. When the payments come in, I could apply the payments, and it would again show up on my customer screen as we saw on the industrial side. Similarly, if I went through the functionality, I won't go through it here, but if I did the processing of a voucher for a particular vendor and I posted it at the time of posting, it would show up on my, let's go to my vendor center, on whichever vendor I'm posting for, and the bill would show up here with the correct information, waiting for me to then cut my check for and pay that when needed. Okay. While we're on the topic of invoicing, I will cover one area. Both on vendors and customers, we allow pre-invoicing or pre-vouchers, and this will allow you to support clients that require either milestone payments, deposits on hand, or deposits or prepayments. And what this allows us to do is to create an entry to receive the cash against, hold it against our deposits, and when the shipment is actually made, Industrios recognizes that there's a deposit against it and will allow us to apply that payment to that shipment. So at any time you can have a look at when the money came in, why it came in. If it was applied, you'd have a listing here of which information or which items, which documents it was connected to, and you could see how much you still have left. So at the end of the month, if you have to reconcile what you have in the GL as for either deferred revenue or deposits on account, the report in Industrios will give you the listing and the totaling of the detailing of all those entries. Okay. So go back to this one here. Okay. So we've looked at and done multiple dives through the customer screens, through the quoting and sales screens, inventory production, and talked about some of the planning screens as well that we have. A couple of the other modules, I won't go into detail with them on today, but we do have a collections module which integrates with the customer account system to generate lists of who you should be calling and track the information of the collection efforts that you've made. We have EDI for those clientele that happen to be in those industries that support EDI for generally automotive or high volume retail. We do have a project management module that's not represented here in this demo set, which allows us to track data and jobs that don't necessarily have to flow through inventory or the production method. So if you come across engineering companies that are more project oriented, then we do have a possible solution. And even in the production environments, the project solution allows you to track information for things like marketing projects or product development projects that otherwise doesn't have a home within the production model world. In terms of post-sale service, we have two modules, customer service and return material. Now let's have a look at these. Again, the most important part of customer service is defining all the different types of tickets or the types of inquiries that could come in to support your client. So it could be maintenance problems, could be inquiries, could be information requests, could be actual warranty issues where something is broken. So the customer service module allows you to track and maintain those tickets, assign the tickets to queues, and have statusing around them. And as they move down through the different statuses, automated information can underpin the system by either changing the queues or sending out history, making appointments, and such. If I change this one right now from under review to waiting for feedback, and I save it, the queue may have changed to something like on hold if I had set it up in that way. But it allows you to track the problem, what they're describing on the phone, any causes if you want to track those, the resolution and disposition if you want to track those. If it's a replacement, if it's a part that needs to be replaced, you can quote right from here in terms of quoting the replacement. If they buy the replacement, you can generate the sales order from here as well to let order entry know that this is an order that came from a service ticket, be it warranty covered or not warranty covered. We have a full functionality and system to track warranty plans and service plans. And then the return material authorization module can be used in conjunction with servicing or on its own, so that if you go to the RMA module, you can track, let's have a look at the RMA, you can track things like has the item been inspected? Here are the actions that come in from an RMA. So you would inspect the item when it comes back. You would maybe ship a replacement for that item. You would maybe issue a credit for that item. And could you issue the credit before the goods are returned, inspected, or even dispositioned? You could return the the product to a vendor because it's still covered under warranty, and you can flow it through. And what the RMA module allows you to do is to keep statusing of where the RMA is, give the authorization number to the client, and track, has it come back? Have we checked it? Were there any problems? Did we replace it? Did we credit it? And all of the inventory transactions that come with it are tracked as well. Okay. So I'm going to take a few minutes and I'm going to describe some of the reporting that we have in the system, and then leave you with a view of our newest module, our newest interface that I'll show you in a few minutes. But to support again the requirements for operational tracking, and some of that was highlighted in the introduction by Jacques, things like on-time delivery. So if you have all this information in the system, you want to be able to glean it and get it out fairly quickly. So there's a couple of different layers of reporting that we can take a look at. If I look at sales order history and my shipping history, I do have the ability to run customer delivery performance reports, which here's a picture of one. So it would give me, over a period of time, the number of lines that were shipped, the value of those shipments, what our completion percentage was, and what our on-time percentage was for those particular items. And you can run this, again, because it's through the application server, you can run this daily, weekly to support whatever internal reporting requirements you have. And all of these reports come predefined within Industrios, with the ability for you to modify your own reports and add them on to our reporting wizards, so that you can make it work even more like a configured and customized system for a particular client. So static reports or informational reports are definitely available on all screens. So whichever screen you're in, you're going to find reports that you'd expect to find for those type of things, like a order listing of sales, late order listing, my back orders, my inventory commitments. But if you want to do a next level of analysis, we've implemented a reporting area that works off of warehouses, so of data snapshots. So in my sales order report area, I could generate a warehouse of information, and that warehouse of information could be filtered. So it could be just the last month, or the last year, or the last 2 years. And depending on what warehouse I'm using, it would run as needed. You'd run the warehouse and create this database of information that's available to you, and then you could run different reports based on those warehouses. So if I click here, I can create a report that says, show me all my sales orders, and at the end of this, I can create 10 columns of information. And I can call this, for example, last month, and I can select the way that we would do a last month here, as I'd say this month minus 1 month. And if I show you that, so relative today, the last month started July 1st, and relative today, it ended July 31st. And I want to display any one of these attributes. So it could be a quantity-driven report. It could be a cost-driven report. It could be just taxes or just margin, depending on what data you've selected into your warehouse and what you want to report on. So typically, we're going to use these for period-type comparisons, where you could show last month of last year, year-to-date, current period, whatever it is that you want to do, and warehouse those reports and show them in that format. Again, it's a paper format, reporting format that you could route and email just like everything else. So we have 2 or 3 different types of warehouses. One's in quoting, one's in sales, one's in invoicing as well, where you can run your warehouse reports. Above and beyond that, where we're moving towards, and Jacques, I think, presented the plan gauge module in the beginning, is a view of what's coming next in Industrios, and this is representative of the new interface of Industrios. So it has elements a little bit different than the folder technique that we had. As I'm moving around through my different tasks, I can select the task from the list. I can move those tasks into a favorite section. You can change some of the viewing parameters around the screen. And in this case, the main dashboard that I've elected to show is an HTML page, which you can configure for your particular client. In this case, we're showing information about Industrios and about some of the different programs that we have available to us. If I open up the dashboards and I now take a look at, for example, my customer dashboard, I have different views of information that I can create from what we call not warehouses anymore, but data marts. And from these data marts, you can create indicators for KPIs and targets, if you like, as well as some visualizations. So a couple of examples. If I click on delivery performance, I have my indicators here in terms of number of jobs on time, not on time current this month, current month, previous month. So it's just an indicator page. If I click on my backlog page, I have not only my indicators, but I have an interactive visualization built on the Tableau model, which allows me to, exclude this value if I want to keep it, change my techniques. I can actually export some of this information, or I could see where I'm trending with my key indicators. The data marts and the definition of these, there's some standards, obviously, that we're going to deliver to you with the module in terms of customers, vendors. Here we have some purchases in terms of dollars. Employee might be who's leaving early and how early did they leave. On the production side, it might be a Gantt view here of our upcoming jobs. So we've got here a little schedule visualization of some jobs, which can be different than the advanced scheduling module. And my inventory, maybe I'm just looking at all those items that are below my minimum. So a listing of items that are below minimum. The module itself will allow you to create those indicators, create the dashboards and group them, and assign those dashboards to different people so that they can interact with that information on a much more timely basis than maybe through scouring reports. So I want to leave you with kind of where we started, that the Industrios system itself, although we have the techniques to run through all of the different workflows that a particular manufacturer would require, be it a make-to-stock, make-to-order, configured order, or project. What's really the power and the depth of the system is in how we are defining those detailed master files, the transactions to support them, and when and where we are tracking those transactions to get us the right information flowing back and forth. So at this point, I'd like to pass it back to Jacques. I think we have a couple of slides to go through and maybe some questions to be answered.
Wow. Thank you, Edward, for this very thorough, complete run-through of Industrios. I have to say, I see this all the time, and I marvel more each time around. So we've got 3 slides to wrap things up. And just bear with me here as I get my computer to behave. Okay, so the first thing I wanted to do is just share with you how we got involved with integrating with QuickBooks. This should give you all a good feel for essentially how to find Industrios prospects in the QuickBooks world. So we were in an evaluation at a company called Plastec, who are manufacturers of custom plastics components. Industrios, in this case, turned out to be the best fit for their operations, but finance did not want to move away from QuickBooks. Their assessment of the situation was that the growth they were experiencing was affecting operations more than finance. They did not want to spend money on implementing a new financial system. Rather, they wanted to spend their money gaining control of their operations. So the decision was made to write the integration between Industrios and QuickBooks. So as you can see from this slide, and Plastec has been live now for over a year, and they've attested to their satisfaction with Industrios as an operation system, as well as with the integration that we've written to QuickBooks. And then since that go live, we've gone live at another QuickBooks site, and there's a few more that are slated to schedule their implementation process incessantly. So how would you identify prospects in the QuickBooks world? Well, first of all, a good rule of thumb for Industrios is companies of 5 million and over, as well as more than 40 employees. And this is because Industrios' price point is higher than the average software product in the QuickBooks world. So to illustrate, a base 10 user system would range from $35,000 to $50,000 for software, and implementation services would be above that. So it goes without saying, a company has to be of a certain size before the investment becomes justifiable and with a reasonable payback period. Loyalty to QuickBooks and an influential CFO are good attributes to give you a solid angle in the sales process. Finally, your customer or prospect should be experiencing growth substantial enough that further growth would be unsustainable without the implementation of a robust manufacturing operation system. If your customers fall into the industrial sweet spot of custom manufacturing with make-to-order, engineer-to-order, project manufacturing, or mixed mode, even better. So what I'd like to do is I'd like to offer or bring up a proposition, and that is bring us a prospect, use us, industrial software, as the manufacturing extension of your practice. Introduce us to your customer or prospect, and we'll manage from there, making sure that every step of the way you are being kept informed as well as involved. When we win, you keep your growing manufacturing customers in the QuickBooks fold, and at the same time earn referral fees, having brought Industrios to the table. And by the way, yes, the Industrios price point might be a little bit higher end of the spectrum than, again, typical modules in the QuickBooks world, but that makes the referral fee all that more attractive. So I take this opportunity to remind you that the Referral Partner Program, as well as 3 other documents, are available for you to download from the control panel. So how do we get started? Well, either visit our website and fill out a contact form, email us at sales@industrios.com, call us, or finally, if you wish, you can use the questions panel right now to indicate your desire to be contacted by an Industrios representative. At this point, we've got a few minutes left. What I'd like to do is get to questions. Eva's been quite busy handling the questions panel throughout the presentation. I've chosen to bring to all of your attention a few of the questions that were asked. In some cases, Edward actually touched on the subject. Sometimes the questions were asked before, but I just want to make sure that we underline these aspects because they are important, and I think it's good for everybody to understand. So the first question was with respect to simultaneously being able to handle units of measure, and the question, the answer to that question is yes, of course, Industrios can handle multiple units of measure, and at the item level for transactions, for purchasing, as well as for selling, and also you can convert. So Industrios can do conversions from stock to production conversions. So that was the first question. The other question that was raised was the ability to have blended environments where some items are make to order and others are make to stock. So let's be clear. The answer to that is yes. Industrios not only handles each one of those modes individually, but also excels at handling them simultaneously within the same company. With the use of different workflows and rules and processes that are applicable to each mode of manufacturing. Last question was with respect to modes other than manual shop floor entry. So Edward spent a good amount of time walking everybody through how you would enter transactions manually on the shop floor. But yes, of course, badge scanning. Industrios is also rolled out in some instances with the use of biometrics. And as well, barcodes can be used from travelers for work centers and material transactions. So I just wanted to make sure that that was all clear to every one of you in attendance. At this point, we're reaching the end. We've spent a lot of time together. I hope that you've found today's session informative. I hope that we've left you the impression, or with the impression, that one, Industrios can handle multiple modes of discrete manufacturing. Two, that Industrios is structured to allow manufacturers to capture data to allow them to monitor key operations metrics. And three, that Industrios can effectively extend your practice to bring value to your growing QuickBooks manufacturers. So on that note, I thank you all for your attention today, and look forward to working with you in the future, and bid you all a very good end of day. Thank you again.